My name is Eleanor. I'm 68 years old, and I discovered my son was trying to steal my family farm while he was on a luxury vacation that I was paying for. So I gave his entire inheritance to complete strangers. This is the story of how it all happened. It's a heavy weight to carry alone, and maybe telling it will lift some of that. I'm sitting on my porch right now, watching the last sliver of sun disappear behind the rolling hills of central Ohio. It's just past 7 p.m. here. I'd truly love to know where you're all listening from and what time it is in your part of the world. Hearing from you might just make the world feel a little smaller, a little less lonely tonight. The last I saw of my son, Marcus, was the arrogant glint of the setting sun off the back windshield of his gleaming black SUV. It kicked up a plume of gravel from the driveway, a driveway my husband Richard and I had laid by hand 40 years ago. He didn't look back. Of course he didn't. His wife, Vanessa, sat in the passenger seat, a silk scarf knotted artfully around her throat, her expression hidden behind sunglasses so large they looked like two black holes. She offered a limp, dismissive wave from her perfectly manicured fingers. "Now, Mom, don't forget the new fertilizer schedule for the tomatoes," Marcus had instructed just moments before, his tone dripping with the condescending patience one uses for a slow-witted child. He gestured vaguely towards the garden with the expensive leather-bound planner he carried everywhere. "And the hydrangeas need water twice a day if the sun is direct. I left a list on the counter." I just nodded, my own hands calloused and stained with the good Ohio earth tucked deep into the pockets of my worn denim jacket. My knuckles found the familiar, cool steel of Richard's old pocket knife. It was a nervous habit, a way of holding his hand, even 2 years after he was gone. "I know, Marcus," I said, my voice flatter than I intended. "I think I can manage. I've only been doing this since before you were born." A muscle jumped in his jaw, a flicker of annoyance he couldn't quite hide before his face settled back into its usual mask of placid superiority. "Right. Well, we'll be back in 2 weeks. Just try to keep things afloat until then." He clapped me on the shoulder, a gesture that was meant to be one of filial affection, but landed like a pat of dismissal on a faithful old dog. "Now try to get some rest, Eleanor," chirped Vanessa, her voice as thin and brittle as a dried leaf. "You've earned it." Then they were gone, leaving behind only the settling dust and a silence that felt heavier than usual. I stood on that porch, the porch Richard had built with his own 2 hands, and watched until the last trace of dust had vanished into the twilight. The familiar evening symphony of the farm began to swell around me, the thrum of cicadas, the distant, melancholy call of a mourning dove, the rustle of wind in the cornfields. This place wasn't just a collection of buildings and fields to me. It was the library of my life. Every fence post Richard had hammered in, every apple tree he had planted, held a story, a memory of his laughter, the scent of his pipe tobacco on the evening air. His last words to me, whispered in the sterile quiet of a hospital room, hadn't been about the farm's deed or its finances. He'd gripped my hand, his own feeling as fragile as a bird's wing, and said, "Take care of our boy, Ellie. He's got a good heart. He gets lost sometimes." That promise had become my compass and my cross. It was the reason I swallowed my pride when Marcus spoke to me as if I were his simple-minded housekeeper. It was the reason I'd agreed to give him a credit card linked to the farm's main account. "For emergencies, Mom, in case something happens with the equipment and you can't get to the bank." It was the reason I stood on that porch now, fighting back the familiar, bitter taste of being taken for granted. A mother's love, I had always told myself, was a stubborn, resilient thing. It had to be.
A few days crawled by in the slow, rhythmic pace of farm life. The quiet was a welcome respite. I found a certain peace in the solitude, in the familiar work that had defined my existence. Then the mail came. Tucked between a seed catalog and the electric bill was a crisp white envelope from our main equipment supplier. A late payment notice. My brow furrowed in confusion. I'd specifically reminded Marcus to pay that bill online before he left. He waved his phone at me, annoyed. "I'm on top of it, Mom. Don't worry about it." With a sigh, I walked into Richard's office. It was my sanctuary, a room that still held his scent, his presence. I sat down at his heavy oak desk, the wood worn smooth in the exact spot his forearms used to rest, and powered up the old desktop computer. My only intention was to log into the bank's website and settle the bill. But my eyes snagged on the balance of the credit card account. My breath caught in my chest. The number was astronomical. It couldn't be right. My hand trembled as I clicked on the View Statement button. The screen filled with a cascading list of transactions. The first few were what I expected. A charge at the gas station, one at the feed store. Then the charges from the last 4 days began to show up. They were all from a single location, a town on the coast I'd only ever seen in magazines. The Seaside Pearl Resort and Spa, $3,450.22. Azure Waters Spa Services, Couples Package, $875 easy own. Gino's Oceanfront Trattoria, $412.80. Boutique du Soleil Women's Apparel, $1,150.00. Captain Jack's Deep Sea Fishing Charter, $600.00. On and on it went. Facials, massages, 5-star dinners, designer clothing, fishing trips. They weren't on a simple vacation. They were living a life of opulent fantasy, and I was paying for it. The farm was paying for it. The money Richard and I had scraped and saved, the funds meant for next year's seed, for a new irrigation pump, for the modest salary we paid our one loyal farmhand, Tom. The air in the office grew thin and cold. Richard's promise to take care of our boy echoed in my ears, but the words were twisted now, curdled into a sick joke. He said Marcus got lost. He didn't say he'd become a common thief. A deep, chilling hollowness spread through my chest, a vacuum where a mother's love had once been. I stared at the screen, at the casual, arrogant way my son was setting fire to a legacy he had never lifted a single finger to build. This wasn't an emergency. This was a pillaging. And in that moment, a small, cold voice in the back of my mind whispered a terrifying question. A question that would change everything. I didn't know it then, but the late payment notice wasn't an oversight. It was a signpost pointing me down a dark road I never knew existed.
For a full 24 hours, I was paralyzed. I moved through the motions of my life in a state of numb disbelief. I watered the hydrangeas with a mechanical precision, my mind a million miles away. I fed the chickens, their clucking a dull, meaningless sound in the background of the roaring in my ears. I mended a section of fence that had come loose in the last storm, my hands performing the familiar task while my heart felt like a cold, heavy stone in my chest. The sun felt harsh and accusatory, the familiar songs of the meadowlark shrill and mocking. Every corner of the farm I looked at, I no longer saw Richard's legacy. I saw a line item on a balance sheet. I saw what my son was willing to trade for a few days of pampered luxury. The grief was a physical entity, a knot of ice in my stomach that refused to melt. But as the second day dawned, something else began to stir beneath the frozen surface of my sorrow. It was a feeling I hadn't allowed myself to feel in a very long time, a pure, unadulterated anger. Not the hot, flashing anger of a momentary frustration, but a deep, glacial rage that brought with it a terrifying clarity. Richard had asked me to take care of our son, but his very first lesson to me when we bought this land was that a farmer's first duty is to protect the soil. The two promises were now at war, and I had to choose which one held the future. Sleep was an impossibility that night. I finally gave up the ghost around 2 a.m., the house groaning around me in the silence. I made my way back to the office, the glow of the computer monitor in the dark room feeling like an open wound. If Marcus was this brazen with the credit card, was this really the beginning? Or was it just the first time I'd been clumsy enough to notice? The thought propelled me into action. This was no longer about a mother's wounded heart. This was about survival. This was an investigation. With a resolve that felt both foreign and frighteningly natural, I pulled out Richard's old accounting ledgers. He was a man of meticulous habits. Every expense, every gallon of fuel, every bushel of corn sold was recorded in his neat, steady cursive. For the next 3 hours, I sat under the green glass of his old desk lamp, a pot of strong, black coffee at my elbow, and I did what my husband had taught me to do. I followed the money. I cross-referenced the bank statements from the last 6 months with the entries in Richard's ledgers and the shoe boxes of receipts I kept filed away in the closet. At first, the discrepancies were small, almost negligible. A farm supply purchase for $250 from a hardware store in a town we never went to, a fuel expense for $150 on a Sunday when the tractor never left the barn, a series of cash withdrawals, all just under the amount that would trigger a notice. They were like tiny pinpricks in the fabric of our finances, easily dismissed on their own. But when I added them up, I realized he had been slowly, quietly bleeding the farm dry for months. This wasn't a sudden impulse. He had been practicing. He had been using the farm's accounts as his personal slush fund, likely to prop up the lavish lifestyle Vanessa demanded, to pay for things his own disappointing salary from his marketing job could never cover. He'd complained for months about being passed over for a promotion, and now I saw this was his pathetic, secret solution. A wave of hot shame and nausea washed over me. I felt like a fool, so utterly and completely blind. My love for my son, my sacred promise to my dying husband, had become a blindfold I had willingly tied around my own eyes. My resolve hardened into something sharp and dangerous. I needed to know the full extent of this. More importantly, I needed to protect what was left. The farm's most vital organs, the deed, Richard's will, and the trust documents were all secure in the large fireproof safe in the closet. But there were other papers, insurance policies, vehicle titles, maintenance contracts. I had to be sure he hadn't gotten his hands on anything else. I began to go through the filing cabinet, my movements methodical and precise. Drawer by drawer, I checked the contents. Insurance, taxes, vehicle titles. Everything seemed to be in order, just as Richard had left it. I was about to close the final drawer, a wave of relief washing over me, when my fingers brushed against something that didn't belong. It was a thin manila folder, tucked away at the very back, hidden behind a stack of old, expired warranties. It was new. The tab was conspicuously, deliberately blank. My heart began to pound again, a slow, heavy drumbeat against my ribs. I pulled it out and carried it back to the desk as if it were a venomous snake. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. What I found inside was not a finished document. It was worse. It was the anatomy of a betrayal. It was a collection of drafts, printouts of emails, and handwritten notes. The letterhead on the top page was from a law firm I'd never heard of, some cut-rate lawyer from a city 50 miles away. The main document was a draft for a new, durable power of attorney, one that would grant Marcus sweeping, absolute powers over my finances and medical decisions in the event I was deemed incapacitated. That alone was a cold fist in my gut, but the emails, printed out and stapled together, that made the blood turn to ice in my veins. The first was from Marcus to this lawyer. It read, "We need the language to be ironclad. It must grant me full and immediate authority over all assets, including real estate, upon the certification of a single physician. No delays, no waiting for a court. My mother is getting on in years, and her health is, let's say, unpredictable." The second was a reply from the lawyer, confirming the changes.
But then I saw a forwarded message, one that made me gasp for air. It was from Vanessa to Marcus. Did you get the quote for the new insurance policy, the one that pays out if the primary business operator has to step down for health reasons? It's a perfect pairing with the POA. Brenda's ex-husband, you remember how nasty their divorce was? He tried something similar. It's the cleanest way to take control without a big, messy fight over the inheritance. There it was, spelled out in cold, black ink. This wasn't just about stealing money for a vacation. This was a coup, a planned, methodical, and ghoulishly patient takeover of my life and my home. They were waiting for me to get sick, to fall and break a hip, to have a stroke. The moment I was vulnerable, they would swoop in, armed with their legal documents, seize control of everything, and I would be utterly powerless. My farm would become their personal bank, and I would be shipped off to the cheapest nursing home they could find, my protest dismissed as the ramblings of a senile old woman.
I leaned back in Richard's chair, the papers scattered on the desk before me. The air in the room felt thick and suffocating. I wasn't just a victim of theft. I was the target of a conspiracy orchestrated by my own son, his wife, and a ghost from his mother-in-law's bitter past. The image of them waving goodbye flashed in my mind, Vanessa's cheerful, "Do try to relax, Eleanor," a cruel, twisted, monstrous joke. They wanted me to relax, while they patiently waited for me to die. I had found the truth, and now the question was no longer what they were willing to do to me. The question was, what in God's name was I willing to do to them? The hours that followed that sickening discovery were a blur of cold, silent fury. I sat in Richard's worn leather chair, the evidence of my son's treachery spread before me like a funeral shroud. The sun began to rise, casting long, pale fingers of light across the office floor, but it brought no warmth, no comfort. For the first time since Richard's own funeral, I felt a profound and terrifying loneliness. But this was a different kind of solitude. It wasn't the dull ache of absence. It was the sharp, crystalline isolation of betrayal. I went to the kitchen and made a fresh pot of coffee, my movements stiff and robotic. As I waited for the dark liquid to brew, my eyes landed on the family tablet we kept on the kitchen counter. It was an older model, one Marcus had given me for my birthday a few years back, with a flourish, claiming it would help me stay connected to the modern world. Mostly, it collected a fine layer of dust. He was still logged into his personal account on it. He was always far too careless and self-absorbed to bother logging out of his devices. A new ugly thought slithered into my mind, a thought born of the new cynicism that was rapidly replacing my maternal instincts. I had seen the emails between Marcus and the lawyer, and the damning one from Vanessa, but who was this Brenda she had mentioned, the one whose bitter divorce had become a roadmap for their own greed? Vanessa's mother, of course. She had gone on the trip with them, a detail I had initially found odd but had dismissed as a family quirk. Now her presence on that vacation felt sinister, like a spider lurking in the corner of a web. Was she just a tag-along, or was she the architect? With a resolve that felt foreign and frightening, I picked up the tablet. My fingers, usually so steady from years of pruning roses and mending tack, fumbled as I navigated the screen. I opened his email client first. It was a chaotic mess of junk mail, fantasy football updates, and work notifications. Nothing of interest. Then my eyes caught the icon for his cloud storage, the place where his phone sometimes automatically backed up files to save space. A folder was labeled simply Voice Memos. My breath caught in my throat. I tapped it open. There were a dozen files, most labeled with dates. One was just 2 weeks ago, right before their trip. The title was a meaningless jumble of numbers. My heart hammering against my ribs, I pressed play. Vanessa's voice, tinny and sharp from the tablet's small speaker, filled the unnervingly quiet kitchen. She sounded exasperated, whiny. "I don't know, Marcus. She's tougher than she looks. What if she just refuses to sign the new POA? You know how stubborn she can be."
Marcus's reply was a muffled, indistinct murmur. But then another voice cut through the recording. A voice I had only heard a few times at holidays and family gatherings. It was older, with a flinty, rasping edge that grated on the ear. It was Brenda. For heaven's sake, Vanessa, stop being so soft. Have you learned nothing? You have to secure your future. Look at what happened to us. Do you remember your father's business going under? Do you remember the foreclosure? The shame of it all? We lost everything because that man was weak. He didn't plan. You have a golden opportunity here, a chance to set yourselves up for life. Eleanor isn't going to live forever. Marcus is her only son. The farm is his birthright. You just have to guide him to claim it. There was a pause. I could hear the faint clink of ice in a glass. Then Vanessa again, her voice lower, a flicker of doubt in her tone. I know, Mom. It just feels wrong. She's his mother. What's wrong is ending up like me, nearly 70 years old with nothing to my name because a miserable divorce left me high and dry with a pittance. What's wrong is letting a stubborn old woman sit on a gold mine while her only son is struggling to pay his bills and can't even get a decent promotion at work. Don't you want a better life? Don't you want your own children to have a college fund that isn't complete joke? Marcus is weak-willed, always has been. He needs you to be the strong one. Now stop your whining and make sure he gets her signature the day you get back. The recording ended abruptly. I sank into a kitchen chair, the tablet slipping from my numb fingers and clattering onto the oak table. The sound was unnaturally loud in the silence. It wasn't just a conspiracy between my son and his wife. It was a multi-generational plot, a sickness passed down, fueled by another family's greed, failure, and festering resentment. They saw me as a stubborn old woman sitting on a gold mine. They didn't see the 40 years of dawn to dusk labor. They didn't see Richard and me huddled over the kitchen table during the lean years, nursing cups of weak coffee and figuring out how to make ends meet. They didn't see the love, the struggle, the sheer force of will that was soaked into every inch of this land. They saw a resource, an asset, an obstacle. The last vestiges of a mother's soft-hearted, stubborn love for Marcus withered and died in that moment. The man that I had raised, the boy whose scraped knees I had bandaged and whose nightmares I had soothed, was gone. In his place was a hollow man, a puppet dancing to his wife and mother-in-law's bitter tune. The betrayal was no longer just about money or land. It was about my entire life, my entire identity, being reduced to a problem to be managed, an inconvenience to be eliminated. The coffee maker on the counter beeped, signaling it was done. I stood up, my back stray as a fence post, and poured myself a cup. The coffee was black and bitter. It tasted like resolve. They had mistaken my kindness for weakness. They had mistaken my grief for senility. It was a fatal error in judgment, and they were going to regret it for the rest of their miserable, entitled lives. The plan began to form in my mind, not as a detailed step-by-step blueprint, but as a single, powerful, unshakable conviction. They would not win. They would not take this farm. I would not be shuffled off to a dreary nursing home to wait for death while they turned Richard's legacy into a series of soulless rental cottages for city folk.
But before I could build my fortress, I needed to understand the full scope of the battlefield. My opponents weren't just the 3 people sunning themselves on the coast. Brenda's words on that recording proved their influence could stretch, that their poison could seep into the ground around me. I needed to know what else they were doing, what stories they were telling when I wasn't there to defend myself. My answer came 2 days later, standing in the brightly lit produce aisle of the local grocery store. I was carefully inspecting a bin of sweet corn when a familiar voice, high and reedy, called my name. "Eleanor, my goodness, it's good to see you out and about on your own." It was Beatrice Gable,
my neighbor from down the road. Bea was a good woman at heart, I suppose, but her tongue was hinged in the middle and wagged at both ends. She was the unofficial town crier, a human telegraph wire. If you wanted to know anything about anyone in our small community, you talked to Bea. And if you wanted everyone to know something, you just had to tell her. "Hello, Bea," I said, forcing a small, tight smile onto my face. "Just picking up a few things for the week." She bustled closer, her face a mask of manufactured concern, her eyes wide with the thrill of possessing insider information. "Oh dear, you must be feeling so overwhelmed, all alone on that big place. I was just saying to my Jim, it's a miracle how you manage. Marcus called me yesterday, you know, all the way from his trip. Such a thoughtful, loving boy." My hand, which had been reaching for an ear of corn, froze in midair. "Oh, did he?" I kept my voice perfectly even, a feat of immense self-control. "How kind of him to think of you. What did he have to say?" Bea leaned in conspiratorially, her voice dropping to a loud whisper. "Well, he's worried sick about you, Eleanor, absolutely beside himself. He said you've been, well, a bit forgetful lately, misplacing important papers, getting confused about the farm's finances. He said he and Vanessa are trying their best to help you get things in order, to take some of the burden off your shoulders before things get too out of hand." The corn husk crackled in my grip as my knuckles turned white. It was a lie. A calculated, vicious, and brilliant lie. He wasn't just planning a legal and financial takeover. He was laying the groundwork for it in the court of public opinion. He was methodically, cruelly, painting me as a dotty old woman who couldn't be trusted with her own affairs. When he eventually made his move, when he produced his power of attorney, he wanted the whole town to nod their heads in sad agreement and say, "Poor Eleanor, it's for the best. Her son is just looking out for her." He wasn't just planning to steal my farm. He was trying to steal my sanity, my credibility, my very identity. "He said that, did he?" I murmured, my voice dangerously quiet. "Oh, yes," Bea forged on, completely oblivious to the storm gathering behind my eyes. "He's worried sick about you, Eleanor, absolutely beside himself. He said you've been, well, a bit forgetful lately, misplacing important papers, getting confused about the farm's finances. He said he and Vanessa are trying their best to help you get things in order, to take some of the burden off your shoulders before things get too out of hand. He's got such a good head for business, that boy. He was talking about how some of the older parts of the orchard aren't very profitable and might be better suited for, well, something else. He's just thinking of your future, dear, your security." The hypocrisy was so staggering, so utterly breathtaking, it almost knocked the air from my lungs. He was using the very security he planned to strip from me as a justification for his treachery. He was turning my neighbors, my friends of 40 years against me, with whispers of love and concern. I looked at Bea, at her earnest, worried face, and I felt a flash of pity for her. She was just a pawn in his disgusting game, an unwitting carrier for his disease. "Bea," I said, and my voice was so firm, so full of a cold authority she had never heard from me before, that it made her physically startle. "Thank you for telling me this. It's very illuminating." Without another word, I turned and walked away, leaving my half-filled shopping cart standing abandoned in the middle of the aisle. I drove home in a haze of icy fury. The battle wasn't just going to be fought with lawyers and bank accounts. It was going to be a battle for the truth, for my name, for my reputation, for my mind. He had made a critical error. He mistook my quiet grief for weakness. He thought I was just a simple farm woman, isolated and easily manipulated. He'd forgotten where I came from. I was the daughter of a farmer who had survived the Dust Bowl and the wife of a farmer who had stared down bankruptcy in the 80s. I had faced droughts, floods, and the soul-crushing loss of the man I loved. A spoiled, greedy boy and his manipulative wife were not going to be my undoing. This smear campaign was the final straw. It was meant to isolate me, to make me doubt myself. Instead, it did the opposite. It incinerated any lingering hesitation, any final foolish shred of maternal pity I might have been harboring. He hadn't just declared war on my finances. He had declared war on my character. And in our small town, character was the only currency that truly mattered. When I got home, I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I walked with a dead calm purpose straight to the telephone on the wall in the kitchen, its long cord tangled like my own thoughts. My hand was perfectly steady as I dialed a number I hadn't called in over a year, but one I knew by heart. The voice that answered on the second ring was sharp, intelligent, and blessedly no nonsense. Marilyn Shaw speaking. Marilyn, it's Eleanor Vance. I need to see you. Immediately. Someone is trying to steal my husband's legacy, and I'm going to need a very, very good lawyer. There was a pregnant pause on the other end of the line, and then, Eleanor. I'll put the kettle on. Get here as fast as your truck will carry you. Marilyn Shaw's law office was on the second floor of a historic brick building that overlooked the town square, a place that had seen a century of commerce and community. It was the same office her father had practiced in, and it felt like a bastion of old-fashioned integrity in a world that seemed to have lost its way. Marilyn herself was in her late 60s, a woman with piercing blue eyes that missed nothing, and a mind that was even sharper. She had been Richard's closest friend since they were children, building forts in the woods behind my farm. She was the executor of his will, a woman whose loyalty was as solid as DeGraddick Courthouse across the street. I sat in the worn leather chair opposite her large mahogany desk and laid everything out. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I presented the facts with the cold precision of a surgeon. The credit card statements, the printouts of the incriminating emails, the drafts of the power of attorney. I told her about the voice memo I had found, about Brenda's poisonous influence, her bitter history coloring my son's future. I recounted my conversation with Bea Gable, detailing Marcus's insidious smear campaign with a chilling accuracy.
Marilyn listened without a single interruption, her fingers steepled under her chin, her sharp eyes moving from my face to the damning papers on her desk. Her expression grew more severe, more thunderous with every word I spoke. When I finally finished, an unnerving silence filled the room, broken only by the ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. "The little buzzard," she finally said, her voice a low, dangerous growl. "The ungrateful little buzzard. Richard would be spinning in his grave. He always said Marcus had a weak streak, a sense of entitlement he couldn't shake. But this is predatory. This is calculated." She looked up at me, her eyes blazing with a fierce, protective fire that warmed me to my core. "Okay, Eleanor, we're going to war. We can shut this down, and we can do it hard and fast. We'll start with a cease and desist letter that will make his hair curl. We'll file a civil suit for elder financial abuse. We can probably get a temporary restraining order to keep him off the property. We will make his life, and the lives of his co-conspirators, a living hell." I listened to the legal arsenal she was laying out for me. The words were powerful, satisfying. They promised retribution. They would punish him. They would stop him. But as I sat there, listening to the language of battle, a different feeling began to surface, an idea that was quieter but infinitely more powerful. Punishing Marcus felt insufficient. It felt like descending to his level, engaging in a grubby, miserable fight over money and control. It would be a victory, yes, but a bitter one. A victory that would still leave the farm, my home, at the center of a festering family wound that would never truly heal. It would define the rest of my life by his betrayal, and I refused to give him that power. "No," I said, and the word, spoken softly into the quiet room, surprised even me with its absolute certainty. Marilyn's perfectly shaped eyebrow shot up. "No? Eleanor, this is not the time to be soft. He is actively trying to defraud you." "I'm not being soft," I said, the idea taking shape, gaining clarity as I spoke it out loud. "I'm being strategic. I don't want to spend the next few years of my life locked in a nasty legal battle.
I don't want my life story to end with the sordid details of how I sued my own son. That's what he wants. A fight, a drama, an excuse to play the victim. I refuse to give him the satisfaction. I looked out her window, at the green canopy of the ancient oak trees in the town square. I don't want vengeance, Marilyn. I want a vision. I turned back to her, my eyes now shining with a newfound purpose. This farm, it taught me everything. It taught me patience, resilience, how to read the seasons, how to find abundance in simplicity. It taught me the value of hard work and the quiet dignity of a life well lived. Richard and I, we weren't just building a business. We were building a life, a set of values. Marcus has forgotten all of that. He sees it as a pile of assets to be liquidated, a problem to be solved. I don't want to just cut him off. That's a defensive move. I want to go on the offense. I want to transform the farm into something that he and his kind can never touch, can never even comprehend the value of. I want to take his precious inheritance and turn it into a legacy, a real one. The idea burst into my mind, fully formed and perfect. What if the farm wasn't for him? What if it was for people who actually care? People who want to learn, young people who have the passion but not the opportunity. What if we created a scholarship, a working fellowship? Marilyn stared at me, her sharp legal mind processing my words. The severe, war-like look on her face slowly softened, melting away to be replaced by a slow-dawning smile of pure, unadulterated admiration. A living trust, she whispered, the legal term clicking instantly into place. An irrevocable living trust. My God, Eleanor, you'll be the trustee for your lifetime with full control, and upon your passing, the entire estate, the farm, the equipment, the accounts, transfers to a new nonprofit entity. The Richard and Eleanor Vance Agricultural Fellowship, I said, the name tasting of justice, hope, and a beautiful final victory. She leaned back in her chair, a broad, triumphant grin spreading across her face. Eleanor Vance, you are an absolute genius. This is so much better than suing him. This isn't just defense, it's poetry. We're not just taking away his toy, we're turning it into a public library for the entire world to see. She immediately grabbed a yellow legal pad and began scribbling notes, her energy infectious. It's perfect. It completely removes him from the equation. He can't contest it, not with his documented financial abuse. It protects you, it protects the farm, and it honors Richard in a way that is just magnificent. A feeling of profound peace, a peace I hadn't felt since before Richard's final illness, settled over me. This was the right path. This was a move that operated on a higher plane than their petty, grubby schemes. I wasn't just building a wall to keep them out. I was planting a new orchard that would bear fruit for generations. I was taking the very thing they wanted to corrupt and making it incorruptible. Let's do it, I said, my voice ringing with a newfound strength. Draw up the papers, all of them, the trust, the new will, revoking his access to every last account. Let's build it, Marilyn. Let's build it strong enough to last 100 years. She looked up from her notes, her blue eyes shining. Consider it done. They wanted your farm, Eleanor. Well, they can't have it. You're about to give it to the world. The days that followed my meeting with Marilyn were filled with a quiet, humming purpose. The heavy, suffocating fog of grief and betrayal had finally lifted, burned away by the bright, clean fire of a mission. I moved with an energy I hadn't felt in years, a lightness in my step that came from taking back control. My first stop was the bank. It was our small community bank, where the manager, a kind, silver-haired woman named Susan, had known me and Richard for the better part of 30 years. She'd co-signed our first loan for a new tractor. I sat down at her desk in the glass-walled office, slid a crisply folded letter from Marilyn across the polished wood, and calmly instructed her to revoke all access, both physical and digital, from Marcus Vance from every single one of my accounts. I asked her to issue me new debit cards, new checkbooks, and to help me change all my online passwords right there and then. Susan read the letter, her professional, courteous expression slowly shifting to one of quiet, serious concern. She looked at me over the rim of her half-moon glasses, her eyes full of unspoken questions. "Is everything all right, Eleanor?"
Everything, I said, my voice firm and even, leaving no room for doubt, is finally being made right. I trust this will be handled with the utmost discretion, Susan. Of course, Eleanor. Absolutely, she said, her tone a reassuring promise that my business was safe with her. The first gears of my counteroffensive were now in motion, turning silently and efficiently behind the scenes. Next, I spent 2 long afternoons in Marilyn's sunlit office, the scent of old books and lemon polish in the air. We went over every line, every clause of the new trust documents. This was not a document of anger. It was a document of hope. We crafted the mission statement for the fellowship with the care of poets. We set up the selection criteria for future students, focusing on passion and need rather than academic pedigree. We allocated funds for scholarships, for living stipends, and for the long-term maintenance and improvement of the farm. With every signature I placed on those heavy, cream-colored pages, I felt a layer of grime being washed away from my soul. I was no longer a victim waiting for the next blow to fall. I was the architect of my own fate, and I was building a fortress of light. All the while, there was a complete and utter silence from the coast. I imagined them on their luxurious vacation, blissfully unaware of the tectonic plates shifting beneath their feet. I pictured them sipping colorful cocktails by a sparkling pool, idly planning how they would present me with the power of attorney documents when they returned, how they would manage my confusion with gentle, patronizing smiles. They were meticulously plotting a future that, unbeknownst to them, had already been canceled. The final piece of the plan was the most delicate, the most crucial. It wasn't enough to simply cut them off financially. It wasn't enough for them to come home to a locked bank account and a changed will. That would lead to a private, ugly confrontation on my porch, a shouting match that would solve nothing and only serve to traumatize me further. After the vicious smear campaign Marcus had launched, I knew I needed more. I needed a public stage. I needed to reclaim my name and my dignity in the very same community where he had so carefully tried to tarnish it. The annual Grange Hall potluck dinner was in 3 days. It was the biggest social event of the season in our rural community, a time when all the farming families for miles around came together to share food, swap stories, and celebrate the harvest. It was a place built on generations of trust and mutual respect. It was the perfect battlefield. "They'll be there," I said to Marilyn over the phone, standing in my kitchen and watching a cardinal land on the bird feeder outside. "They got back the day before. Marcus will want to show his face, to keep up the charade of the loving, concerned son. He'll see it as his last best chance to cement his narrative before they make their move." "So what's the plan?" Marilyn asked, her voice laced with the delicious anticipation of a legal grandmaster about to spring a trap. "I need you to do 2 things for me," I said. "First, I need you to be there. I want you to sit in the front row where they can't possibly miss you. I want them to see you, my lawyer, sitting by my side." "I wouldn't miss it for the world," she replied, a chuckle in her voice. "Second," I continued, taking a deep breath and steadying myself, "I need you to send an email from your official law office address. Send it directly to Marcus." "What do you want it to say?" I thought for a moment, choosing my words with the care of a demolition expert setting a charge. "Make it short, formal, and just a little bit intimidating. Something like, Mr. Vance, this is to inform you that your mother, Eleanor Vance, will be making an important announcement regarding the future of Vance Farms at the Grange Hall dinner on Saturday evening. As this involves a significant matter of family inheritance and succession, your presence is requested." There was a low whistle on Marilyn's end. "Oh, that is deliciously cruel, Eleanor. You're not just setting a trap, you're decorating it with a ribbon and a welcome mat." "I need him to believe he's won," I said, a sliver of ice in my voice.
He and Vanessa will read that email, coming from my lawyer, and they'll assume the best-case scenario for them. They'll think I'm old and scared, that I've consulted you and you've advised me to capitulate to avoid a fight. They'll think I'm going to stand up in front of everyone we know and announce my retirement, tearfully handing the reins of the farm over to my dear, capable son. They'll walk right into it, Marilyn confirmed. They'll be preening, polishing their acceptance speeches. Let them, I said, a quiet, dangerous calm settling over me. Pride comes before the fall, and I want them standing on the highest possible pedestal when they finally tumble. We hung up, and a profound sense of peace washed over me. The bait was set, the stage was being prepared. All I had to do now was wait. I spent the next 2 days not in fear, but in quiet preparation. I baked my famous apple crumble for the potluck, the sweet scent of cinnamon and baked apples filling my kitchen and soothing my soul. I carefully chose my outfit, a simple but dignified blue dress that Richard had always said matched my eyes. I went over my speech in my head, not memorizing the words, but etching the core of its unshakable truth onto my heart. I was ready. The air in the Grange Hall was thick with the cheerful, chaotic symphony of community. It buzzed with life. The long, scarred wooden tables were groaning on the weight of 100 potluck dishes. Heaping bowls of potato salad, platters of crispy fried chicken, bubbling casseroles, and at least a dozen different kinds of pie, each one a testament to a family's secret recipe. The sound of deep-bellied laughter and friendly, overlapping chatter echoed off the high, wood-beamed ceiling. It was a living picture of everything I loved about our town: warmth, fellowship, and a shared history that ran as deep as the roots of the old oak trees outside. And tonight, it was my stage. I arrived early, deliberately so. I placed my still-warm apple crumble on the dessert table and took a moment to breathe it all in. Then I began to move through the room, a slow, deliberate circuit. I greeted my neighbors, people whose parents and grandparents knew mine. I saw it in their eyes immediately, the flicker of curiosity, and in some, a deep, sorrowful pity. B. Gable's whispers had done their insidious work. People were kind, of course. They were good people. But there was a new distance in their interactions with me, a carefulness in their questions. "How are you holding up, Eleanor?" asked Martha, whose farm bordered mine to the west. "You make sure you let us know if you need anything at all," said old Mr. Henderson, patting my arm with a hand as gnarled as an oak branch. They were treating me like a fragile relic, a puzzle with missing pieces. I simply smiled, thanked them for their concern, and kept my composure. My time would come. I would not be defined by their pity. Then they arrived.
Marcus and Vanessa didn't just enter the room, they made an entrance. They swept in as if they were royalty gracing a peasant gathering, a full half hour after everyone else. Marcus was wearing a crisp new button-down shirt, unbuttoned just one button too many, and Vanessa was poured into a white dress that was far too tight and far too fancy for a country potluck. They were tanned from their coastal vacation, rested, and radiating an almost unbearable aura of smug satisfaction. I saw Marcus's eyes scan the room, his gaze landing on me for a brief moment. He gave me a small, knowing, condescending smile, a look that said, "It's all going according to plan. Poor old thing." He had clearly received Marilyn's email and interpreted it exactly as I had prayed he would. He believed this night was his coronation. They began to work the room, a perfectly rehearsed and nauseating performance. Marcus would clap a fellow farmer on the back, asking about his crop yields with a feigned interest that was almost artistic in its insincerity. Vanessa would compliment a woman on her dress, her voice dripping with a sweetness that could give you a toothache. And all the while, they were weaving their narrative, reinforcing the foundation of their lies. I was close enough to overhear snippets of their carefully crafted conversations. To one group, Marcus said with a heavy, theatrical sigh, We had a wonderful trip, but honestly, I couldn't stop thinking about Mom. It's just so much for her to handle on her own these days. We're going to be stepping up to help a lot more." To another, I heard Vanessa murmur with practiced sympathy, "Eleanor is so proud, you know? It's terribly hard for her to admit she needs help, but we're going to be making some changes to ensure she can finally enjoy her golden years without all this stress and worry." With every word, they were laying another brick in the wall of their deception, a wall they believed was protecting them but was, in reality, trapping them. I watched them, a strange, cold detachment settling over me. I saw Bea Gable nod sympathetically, her brow furrowed with genuine concern. I saw others exchange knowing, pitying glances in my direction. They were buying the performance, hook, line, and sinker. I found my designated seat at a table near the front. A few minutes later, right on cue, Marilyn Shaw walked in. She was wearing a sharp, impeccably tailored navy blue suit and carrying a slim leather briefcase. She looked every inch the powerful, no-nonsense lawyer she was. Her very presence sent a ripple of curiosity through the room. She walked with a confident stride directly to my table, ignoring the dozens of curious stares, and sat down beside me. "Evening, Eleanor," she said, her voice carrying just enough for those at the neighboring tables to hear clearly. "Glad I could make it. Wouldn't want you to be up here all by yourself for this." I saw Marcus's eyes dart towards us and a slow, triumphant grin spread across his face. The sight of Marilyn, my lawyer, sitting at my side seemed to be the final confirmation he needed. He thought she was here to ensure the transition of power went smoothly, to be a legal witness to my dignified surrender. He gave Vanessa a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. The trap was now irresistible. Dinner was served and the happy chatter resumed. I ate my food slowly, calmly. I even had a slice of my own apple crumble. Inside, my heart was beating a steady, powerful rhythm, like a drum before a battle. I felt no fear, only a profound and righteous sense of clarity. Every lie they told, every pitying glance I received, only strengthened my resolve. They had chosen this stage. They had chosen this audience. They had meticulously prepared the ground for their own spectacular humiliation. Finally, after the last of the dessert plates were cleared away, Jim Orton, the president of the Grange, and a man I'd known since he was in diapers, stood up at the podium. He tapped the microphone, a high-pitched squeal echoing through the hall. "All right, folks, if I can have your attention. Settle down, settle down. It's wonderful to see every single one of you here tonight." He made a few routine announcements about upcoming events and crop prices, and then he smiled warmly in my direction. "And tonight, we have a special word from one of our community's true pillars. Eleanor Vance has been a part of this Grange for over 40 years, and she has an important announcement to share with us all about the future of Vance Farms. Eleanor, the floor is yours." A polite, expectant smattering of applause filled the room. This was it. I saw Marcus straighten his tie, a predatory gleam in his eye. Vanessa smoothed her white dress, a perfect beatific smile plastered on her face. They both stood up as if to join me on the stage, ready to graciously accept their prize. I met Marilyn's gaze. She gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod of encouragement. I stood up, took a deep breath, and walked towards the podium, leaving my son and his wife standing alone and expectant in the middle of the room, bathed in the warm, unforgiving light. I stepped up to the podium, the warmth of the single focused spotlight making me feel strangely calm, insulated from the 200 pairs of eyes fixed on me. The hall fell into a deep, expectant silence. I looked out at the faces of my friends and neighbors, people whose births, marriages, and funerals I had attended, people who had marked the seasons of my life. I saw their curiosity, their genuine concern, and yes, the lingering pity that Marcus had so skillfully planted. And then my eyes found him. Marcus and Vanessa were still standing near their table, their smiles fixed and ready, their bodies tense with a greedy, triumphant anticipation.
They looked like two vultures who had patiently waited for a wounded animal to finally draw its last breath, ready to descend upon the carcass. I cleared my throat, the small sound amplified by the microphone. "Thank you, Jim," I began, my voice emerging clear and stronger than I had expected. It didn't tremble. "Good evening, everyone. It's so good to see all of you here tonight." I paused, deliberately letting the silence hang in the air for a beat longer, drawing every ounce of attention in the room towards me. Jim is right. I'm here tonight to talk about the future, my future, and more importantly, the future of Vance Farms. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Marcus puff out his chest slightly, a subtle, arrogant gesture of ownership. This was his moment. He was ready. "As many of you know," I continued, my gaze sweeping slowly across the room, making eye contact with as many people as I could, "I've lived on that land for over 40 years. My husband, Richard, and I, we built it from the ground up. We poured our youth, our strength, and our hearts into that soil. It's more than a business to me. It's more than a home. It is a legacy of love and hard work." I let those words sink in, a foundation of truth for what was to come. "Lately," I said, my voice taking on a more serious tone, "there have been some conversations, some rumors about my ability to continue managing the farm on my own these days. There's been talk of my health, of my getting forgetful, of the need for me to step back and let a younger, more capable generation take over."
I saw Bea Gable shift uncomfortably in her front row seat, her cheeks flushing a dull red. Several other people suddenly found the patterns on their tablecloths fascinating. I had them, all of them. "I want to thank my son, Marcus," I said, turning my head to look directly at him. His smile widened, a flash of white teeth in his tanned face, "for bringing this matter to my attention so forcefully." His smile faltered, just for a fraction of a second. The wording was not what he had been anticipating. It was a dissonant note in his perfectly composed symphony of succession. "His concern for my well-being has prompted me to do a great deal of thinking over these past few weeks, a great deal of reflection. It pushed me to look very, very closely at our finances, at our legal documents, and at what the word legacy truly means." I leaned forward slightly, my hands resting firmly on the sides of the podium. And in doing so, I made some discoveries. I discovered that a legacy isn't something you are simply entitled to because of your bloodline. It is not a prize to be won or a property to be liquidated for a quick profit. A true legacy is a set of values that you pass on, something that enriches the future, something that grows and gives back to the earth that sustained you. The room was now utterly, completely still. You could have heard a pin drop on the worn wooden floor. Marcus's face was no longer smiling. It was a rigid mask of confusion. Vanessa's perfect, serene smile had vanished entirely, replaced with a tight, anxious line. The air crackled with tension. "My son believes the future of Vance Farms in building rental cottages and chasing quick, easy profits. He has his vision." I paused, letting the weight of that statement settle. Then I delivered the killing blow. "And I have mine." And so, after careful consideration and with the expert legal counsel of my dear friend and trusted lawyer, Marilyn Shaw, I gestured to Marilyn at my table, who gave a slow, dignified nod to the crowd. "I have made a final and irrevocable decision about the future of my farm. I am here tonight, in front of all of you, my friends and my community, to announce the formation of a new institution, the Richard and Eleanor Vance Agricultural Fellowship." A collective, audible gasp went through the hall. It was a sound of pure shock. Marcus's jaw literally dropped open. Vanessa's face went completely, shockingly white.
as if all the blood had drained out of it at once. They looked like statues, frozen in a tableau of disbelief. "Effective immediately," I said, my voice ringing with a power and authority I didn't know I possessed. "My entire estate, including the farm, its buildings, its equipment, and all of its financial assets, has been placed into an irrevocable living trust. Upon my passing, this trust will fund a full scholarship, housing, and a living stipend each and every year for 2 aspiring young farmers who have the passion, the drive, and the love for the land, but not the financial means to start their own careers in agriculture. The farm will no longer be a private inheritance. It will be a place of learning, a place of opportunity, and a place of hope. It will be a legacy that truly honors my husband's belief in hard work, community, and the sacred duty of tending the earth." For a moment, there was a stunned, profound silence as the full weight of my announcement settled over the room. Then, from the back of the hall, old Mr. Henderson, a man of few words but immense integrity, stood up and began to clap, his applause slow, deliberate, and loud. Then Martha stood up. Then the Gables. Within seconds, the entire hall was on its feet, the applause deafening. It wasn't just polite clapping, it was a roar of approval, of understanding, of justice served. They weren't just clapping for my decision, they were clapping because the truth, in all its stark and brutal clarity, had finally come to light. I looked at my son. His face was a grotesque, blotchy mixture of shock, fury, and utter, soul-crushing humiliation. He was exposed. In front of everyone he had tried to impress, everyone he had lied to, everyone whose pity he had courted, he had been revealed as a greedy, scheming, pathetic failure. Vanessa looked like she was about to be physically ill, her hand clutching her throat. The applause finally began to die down. I took one last deep breath. "Thank you," I said simply, my voice thick with an emotion that wasn't triumph, but a deep, cleansing relief. And I walked off the stage, my head held high. I didn't look back at them. I didn't need to. The reckoning was complete. I walked back to my table through a sea of supportive, smiling faces. It was as if a spell had been broken. The pity was gone, replaced with a fierce, palpable respect. Hands reached out to touch my arm, to squeeze my shoulder. Voices murmured, "God bless you, Eleanor," and "That was the bravest thing I've ever seen." Bea Gable, her face streaked with tears of shame and regret, intercepted me before I could sit down. "Eleanor, I am so sorry," she whispered, her voice choked. "I had no idea. I was a fool to listen to him, to spread those awful things." I simply patted her hand. "He fooled a lot of people, Bea, including me, for a very long time." The social fabric of the room, which had been subtly warped by Marcus's lies, had been violently and decisively rewoven. Marcus and Vanessa were now social lepers, islands of shame in a sea of silent condemnation. No one would meet their eyes. As if by a silent collective agreement, people turned their backs, forming tight, animated circles of conversation that pointedly, cruelly excluded them. Their public coronation had become their public execution, and the entire town was their witness. I saw them through a gap in the crowd. They were arguing, their faces inches apart, their whispers vicious and sharp. Vanessa was gesturing frantically toward the exit, her face contorted with a panicked rage. Marcus looked shock-shelled, his face pale and clammy, his eyes darting around the room as if looking for an escape route that didn't exist. They finally stumbled towards the exit, their glamorous, confident entrance a distant, laughable memory, now replaced by a shamed, hurried retreat into the darkness. But Marcus, it seemed, had one last bit of fight in him. Or perhaps it was just the last gasp of a dying ego. As I was gathering my things, my empty crumble dish and my purse, preparing to leave on a wave of goodwill, he confronted me near the doorway. He had waited for me, lurking in the shadows of the coat room, away from the main crowd, but still within sight of a few lingering onlookers. His face was blotchy and red, his eyes wild with the frantic desperation of a cornered animal. "How could you?" he hissed, his voice trembling with an impotent fury. "In front of everyone! Everyone! You've ruined me! You've destroyed my life! That was my inheritance! Mine! It was my birthright!" I looked at my son, at this 42-year-old man throwing a tantrum like a toddler whose favorite toy had just been snatched away. And in that moment, I felt nothing. Not anger, not pity, not even sadness. Just a vast, empty distance. The emotional tether that had bound me to him for his entire life had finally, irrevocably snapped.
"Your inheritance, Marcus," I said. My voice as calm and cold as a winter morning, was the knowledge of how to work this land with honor. It was the memory of a father who loved you. It was the respect of this community. You squandered all of it long before tonight. I thought of the old worn shovel that always leaned against the porch rail back home, the one Richard had used for so many years, its wooden handle smoothed by his sweat and labor. The symbol was still potent, still true. "You have never understood," I said, my voice quiet but carrying the weight of a final judgment. "You think value is something you can withdraw from a bank, a number on a statement. But real value, lasting value, is something you build with your own two hands, with your own sweat. You wanted the farm? I'll tell you what I told myself the day I found out what you were planning. If you want something from this land, you have to be willing to work it." I held his wild, desperate gaze. "The offer is always open, if you're ever willing to try. But you'll start with nothing but the dirt under your fingernails and the ache in your back, just like your father and I did." He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish, but no words came out. The concept of starting from scratch, of earning something through honest, unglamorous labor, was so alien, so repulsive to him, that he couldn't even form a response. Defeated, his shoulders slumped. He turned without another word and stalked out into the night, disappearing into the darkness that he had created for himself. The aftermath was swift and, I admit, satisfying. Marilyn told me later that Marcus had called her the following Monday, screaming about contesting the trust, threatening lawsuits. She'd calmly informed him that any such attempt would be met with a vigorous countersuit for financial elder abuse, complete with notarized bank statements, copies of his own incriminating emails, and a sworn affidavit from me. She mentioned, quite casually, that such matters often attract the interest of the district attorney's office, and that he'd be lucky to avoid criminal charges. He never called her again. Within a month, the whispers around town had completely transformed. I was no longer poor Eleanor. I was a force to be reckoned with, a quiet woman who had stood her ground. The story of Marcus and Vanessa's spectacular humiliation at the Grange Hall became the stuff of local legend. I heard through the grapevine, mostly from a very repentant Bee Gable, that they had been forced to sell their fancy SUV to pay off the massive credit card debt from their vacation. They broke the lease on their expensive townhouse and moved into a cramped, dingy apartment on the bad side of town. Brenda, I was told, wanted nothing more to do with them, her grand scheme having blown up in her face. Their carefully constructed world, built on a foundation of lies and entitlement, had crumbled into dust. I didn't rejoice in their misery. That wasn't my way. But I didn't mourn their absence either. Their final, dramatic departure from my life was like the lancing of a deep, infected wound. It was painful, yes, but it was necessary. It was the only way the healing could truly begin. And that healing, when it came, arrived from a source I never could have expected. The first few months after the public reckoning at the Grange Hall were quiet. It was a healing silence. The farm was peaceful, the familiar, steady rhythm of the seasons a comforting balm to my bruised soul. The ugly, frantic static of my son's entitlement was gone,
and in its place, I could hear the land breathing again. I worked from sunup to sundown, not out of a sense of grim obligation, but out of a renewed, fierce love for the soil, for the life I had chosen and built. Marilyn and I worked diligently with a shared sense of joyful purpose to bring the fellowship to life. We formed a small advisory board with Mr. Henderson and a few other respected community members. We spent weeks poring over applications from young people all over the country, their essays filled with a passion for the land that brought tears to my eyes. We prepared the small cottage on the property, the one Richard had built with his own hands for his own mother decades ago, for our first 2 students. They arrived in early spring, just as the first tender green shoots of corn were pushing their way through the dark, rich earth. Their names were Sarah and Leo. Sarah was a bright, energetic young woman from a concrete jungle of a city, with a degree in environmental science and a fiery passion for sustainable agriculture, but no land of her own to work. Leo was a quiet, hardworking young man who had grown up on a tenant farm in the South, his family always subject to the whims of a landlord. He dreamed of one day having a piece of land to call his own, to nurture and pass on. They were in every conceivable way the antithesis of Marcus. They were respectful to the point of reverence. They were endlessly curious, following me around the farm like 2 eager puppies, asking intelligent questions. They were hungry to learn, to work, to get their hands dirty. They didn't see the farm as a commodity, an asset to be leveraged. They saw it as a classroom, a library, a sanctuary. They listened, truly listened, when I spoke, their eyes wide with genuine interest as I showed them the tricks Richard had taught me, how to graft a new branch onto an old apple tree, how to read the clouds for signs of coming rain, how to tell by the smell of the air if the soil was healthy. They brought a new life, a new energy to the farm that I hadn't realized was missing. Their youthful laughter echoed in the old barn, a sound that chased away the last of the lingering ghosts. Their questions challenged me, forcing me to articulate the deep, instinctual knowledge I had held in my bones for decades. They weren't just students. They were a connection to the future, a bridge between my past and a world I would never see. Watching them work, their young, strong hands covered in the same rich Ohio soil that covered my own, I felt a sense of purpose so profound, it almost made me dizzy. One warm evening in early summer, the 3 of us were sitting on the porch steps sipping iced tea and watching the fireflies begin their nightly, magical dance over the darkening fields. "You know, Eleanor," Sarah said, her voice soft in the twilight, "my grandfather, he lost his family farm back in the 80s during the crisis. He had to sell it for pennies on the dollar and move to the city to work in a factory. He talked about it until the day he died. He always said that losing the land was like losing a part of his soul." She looked at me, her expression full of a gratitude so deep it was humbling. "What you've done here, you haven't just given us an opportunity, you've saved a soul. This farm's soul." Her words struck a chord deep inside me, a truth I hadn't been able to articulate myself. She was right. In fighting for my own dignity, I hadn't just been fighting for myself. I had been fighting for the spirit of this place, for the values of hard work and stewardship that Richard and I had woven into its very fabric. A few weeks later, a young, earnest reporter from the state's biggest newspaper came out to do a story on the fellowship. The article was published the following Sunday, a full-page feature in the lifestyle section, complete with beautiful, sun-drenched photographs. The headline read, "A legacy of soil, not spoil. How one woman turned betrayal into a bounty for the next generation." There was a large photo of me standing between Sarah and Leo in the middle of our thriving vegetable garden, all 3 of us beaming, our faces glowing with sweat and happiness. I framed that article. I hung it on the wall in the office, right next to the faded photograph of me and Richard on our wedding day. 2 young kids with a crazy dream. They belonged together. One represented the beginning of our legacy, The other represented its unexpected, beautiful continuation. My name is Eleanor Vance. I'm 68 years old, and I've learned that the most profound love isn't about holding on so tightly that you suffocate something. It's about cultivating something with such care that it can grow and thrive long after you're gone. I took the pain and ugliness of betrayal and I plowed it back into the earth. And from that bitter soil, something new, something strong, something beautiful has begun to grow. My true inheritance is not in a bank vault or on a deed. It is in the hopeful faces of the young people who will learn from this land. It is in the quiet peace I feel as the sun sets over my farm, a peace I earned, a harvest of truth I reaped all by myself. Thank you for listening to my story. It means more to me than you'll ever know.